So it's time to move away from those dummy posts. That of course brings up one question. Where do we want to store our actual posts? And one pretty obvious choice would be a database. Something like Firebase or MongoDB or a SQL database. And there is nothing wrong with that. We could do that. But for a blog like this, which is owned by us, where we write those blog posts, there also is another very nice solution. We could use our file system as a data source. Because we don't need to write to our blog posts, I mean, we have to write them at some point, but then once they're done, they are a data source from which we only fetch data. We only use them to load blog posts. Users on the website can't interact with them to change them. So once they exist, we might occasionally update, but whenever we do that, we as an owner dive directly into those blog posts, but the files themselves are then only fetched by our application. So if we use our local file system here, our project folder, we don't have to set up an extra database and pay for it. We don't have to do all that wire up work. And that can be pretty nice. And therefore, a quite common approach is to add a new folder in your project folder, which could be named content. But that name is totally up to you. It doesn't have to be named content. And in there, we could have a subfolder named posts if we would have different kinds of content. Or if we don't have that, we get rid of that folder. And instead of a content posts folder, we just directly add a posts folder in the project. Now the idea is that in that posts folder, we store our posts. And what do I mean with store our posts? Well, keep in mind that we will write our posts with Markdown, so with that Markdown syntax. Hence, I'll add a new file in there, let's say the getting-started-with-next.js.md file. MD stands for Markdown. So this is a Markdown file which I added here. And in there we can write Markdown code. You can also install extra extensions that help you with writing Markdown code. In Visual Studio Code, if you search for Markdown. There you can install extra support, but I don't even have that. I'm happy to write it like this. Now in here, we can write that Markdown code like this is a title. This is some regular text with a link. That is something we could write here as content. However, if you take a closer look at our pages and our different components, you might see that just content is not enough. We also rely on an excerpt and a date and a title and an image for outputting all our posts. So we need to add metadata to our posts. And the great thing about Markdown is that you can easily combine it with a concept called gray matter, which is just metadata you add to your Markdown file. You add that by adding 3 dashes, opening and closing, so to say, above your content. So here we have 3 dashes, and between those 3 dash separators, we can add our metadata for this Markdown file as key value pairs, basically, in YAML format, to be precise. And you can look up YAML format to see what's allowed in here. For example, we can set a title here to "This is the post title," or in this case, probably "Getting started with Next.js." We can add a date, which could be 2022-10-15. And we can also wrap that in quotes to make it clear that that's a string. It's technically not always required, but can be required sometimes if YAML is not able to find out which data type it is otherwise. Here you could also add an author if you need that. I don't have it in this blog, since it's only my blog and I'm the only author of all those posts, but you could add an author field here as well, and then fetch and render that later. Now what we'll need is an image though. We will definitely need that. And here I'll just have my getting-started next.js.png image file here. So this image file which I added in the images posts folder before. And as a side note, to connect everything correctly and use the already existing structure in the public images folder, you should make sure that your posts markdown file has a file name that matches one of the folder names in that posts folder in the images folder. Because we'll then later connect all that data such that we fetch the image we specify here from an equally named folder in the public images posts folder. So you should make sure that this is equal. Then here we can also add an exert. And I'll just quickly grab my dummy exert here, which I wrote down before from the index.js file, and add that as an exert here. I didn't add a line break here. That's just my IDE, which is kind of showing a line break. It's one long inline text. And I will now also add a isFeatured key here and set this to true. So Boolean values are also allowed here. We will then later use that for selecting just the featured posts for the starting page. So that's now extra metadata, and that's the actual post content. And we can write files like this, and we can also fetch data from such files and split it in metadata and content. All of that is possible with ease. And therefore that will be our data source here. So now with that, I'll save that markdown file, and I will now also get rid of the other dummy post folders in the images folder and just keep one of those folders around for that markdown file we just added. And now the goal is to kind of use our posts folder as a data source to generate all required single post files based on the number of post files in the posts folder, to load the featured posts from there, so to go through all the posts and select the featured posts for the starting page, and to load all the posts for the all posts page. And that's what we're going to do in the next lecture.